Today I'm joined by Teague Egan, who is the founder and CEO of EnergyX. Welcome, Teague.
Thank you, Scott.
All right. So why don't we first start with what is EnergyX and what do you guys do that's different from others?
Yeah, absolutely. So EnergyX, we're a renewable energy company founded in 2018, or late 2017, early 2018. And we're focused on lithium extraction, direct lithium extraction, to make battery materials more abundant for the electric vehicle revolution.
Sounds great. Now, my understanding is that when it comes to producing battery-grade lithium or 99.5% purity from the salt brine, it involves separating out the sodium chloride, the potassium chloride, and then, of course, the magnesium chloride. And the last one, the magnesium chloride, tends to be fairly expensive to remove. And when it comes to specifically Bolivia's Salar de Uyuni, which is the biggest lithium mine that's out there in the world, it's got a pretty high content of magnesium that's out there. And it just makes it really economically very difficult to extract out using the current methods. How is your method different? What do you do?
Yeah, so that's pretty accurate, actually. The Salar Atacama, which is in Chile, has about a 6-to-1 ratio of lithium to magnesium. So during the evaporation pond sequence, they're able to evaporate out a lot of the H2O and then move the final solution into a facility to get out the rest of the magnesium. That's why it's one of the biggest lithium producing areas in the world. Adversely, the Salar de Uyuni in Bolivia has much higher magnesium to lithium ratios at about 20-to-1. So they're seeing huge problems. They really don't know how to get out the magnesium from the mixture of salts in the brine. That's the reason that they actually haven't produced any lithium from Uyuni. The way that is typically done with the evaporation ponds leaves only about 30 to 50% recovery rate of lithium, even with 6-to-1 ratio in Atacama. Moving over to Uyuni, the evaporation ponds can't be effective in that scenario with 20-to-1 ratios. Where we are different is we don't use evaporation ponds. We're a direct extraction technology that puts the source feed of brine through a membrane that selectively separates the lithium from the magnesium. So we can actually work in any amount of salinity at any ratio of magnesium to lithium. That's why our technology would be effective in Bolivia. However, there's a lot of geopolitical hurdles to overcome in Bolivia, and that's why no public companies or outside companies are working there right now.
I see. So let's get into some of the more specifics. Based on research, there are quite a bit of wide range of emerging technologies from companies like Eramet, Rincon, MGX Minerals, Nemesca Lithium, Bacanora Minerals. And when it comes to some of the common areas in development that they're all trying to address one is, the removal of having to use solar evaporation, which tends to be very lengthy. And I think you mentioned it in your questions as well. That increase. So if they can remove the solar evaporation, it actually allows for them to increase production capacity. The second part is improving the final purity level, but at a much lower investment cost and a lower operating cost. And thirdly is the lower reduction in environmental impact of lithium brine mine. Now, to just again go a little bit more specific, because you mentioned membrane, is that Rincon, their method uses nanofiltration, and it goes to lithium phosphate formation, and then phosphate precipitation, and then carbonation, then filtration. Whereas Nemesca Lithium, they produce both the lithium hydroxide monohydrate and the lithium carbonate from the spodumene concentrates. And they're roasted and they leach with sulfuric acid, and they produce this sodium of lithium sulfate. And they actually use electrolysis then to convert the lithium sulfate directly to the lithium hydroxide. And after that crystallization of the lithium hydroxide monohydrate, the carbon dioxide can then be used to convert into lithium hydroxide to lithium bicarbonate and then heat it to produce the lithium carbonate. How is your method different in those two scenarios?
That was a lot there. I'll try to address everything one by one. So when we're talking about companies that use nanofiltration, nanofiltration is fundamentally different than the membranes that we're using because they cannot operate at high salinities. So these companies that are using nanofiltration must dilute the brine significantly to then separate out the lithium. They can only really operate at a maximum of the upper levels are really 10% dissolved salts in the solution. Most of these brines down in South America are anywhere from between 20 to 40% salinity. And in order to dilute a brine and use nanofiltration, you obviously need a lot of fresh water. And that's something that the driest place in the world lacks. So that's why you don't really see a lot of nanofiltration. I mean, if nanofiltration was the key and you could get the lithium out of the salars using nanofiltration, there would be no need. I mean, every company would be using it, right? But we're not seeing a high adoption rate of that for that exact reason. Where our technology is different is we can operate at high salinity. It's a new type of membrane that is somewhat in the beginning stages, but we're kind of in the middle of the development and technology readiness level and about to enter into some pilot phase programs in about the next 6 months to a year. So we're getting close to commercialization and we're excited about that. What were some of the second point that you mentioned in the question?
I want to drill down a little bit onto the membrane. So does the membranes, is it separating it out, and if so, how are you then removing the pollutants that you don't actually want? And does that require the replacement or the maintenance of membranes, especially if you're doing large volumes of processing? So tell me about kind of the details of the process, but also the ongoing maintenance of it.
Yeah. So I just remembered the one other point that you mentioned earlier before about a lot of these companies are trying to, technology companies are trying to come up with solutions to avoid evaporation ponds. The reason for that is because really up until now, lithium has not been a very highly demanded material. In 2010, the total lithium production that satisfied the market was 80,000 metric tons. In 2025, we're looking at a total demand of anywhere from 1.3 million to 1.5 million tons. I mean, that's 15 plus X increase in demand, right? So because of that, the old methods, the evaporation pond methods, are not enough to meet the demand. Expanding that capacity is very capital intensive, building new evaporation ponds for such low recovery rates with such a long time span for delivery. And that's why you see a lot of these technology companies trying to create direct extraction technologies. In terms of the membrane and the mechanism of action, how our technology operates, it's a new type of membrane using what's called a metal organic framework, which is a nanoparticle that has two mechanisms of action. So if you're thinking about the salt brine and it's this water filled with all these different salts, all these different salt ions are different sizes. So lithium is a different size than magnesium. It's a different size from potassium. It's a different size from calcium. They also have different charges. So lithium, potassium, sodium are single charged ions, where magnesium, calcium, are dually charged ions. They have, +2 in their chemical sequence. So when the brine is moving through our membrane, there's two things that are happening. One is a size sieving effect. So think about when you like strain food out, the water goes through, but the potatoes stay in the bowl or whatever. We have the lithium moves through because it's small enough to move through, where the magnesium and the calcium are too big to move through, but they also, because they're dually charged, cannot move through because there's too much energetic penalty to shed their water molecules. So all these molecules are in this brine. They have water. When they move through, they shed their water if they're small enough, but the magnesium and the calcium and the sulfates don't want to shed their water because they're dually charged. So we're seeing an energetic penalty. The energetic penalty is too big for them to move through. So at the end of the day, we have lithium moving through, we have sodium moving through, we have potassium, and then they need to have an equal charge balance. So you see your negatively charged ions, such as your chlorides, moving through to keep that balance. We also have membranes that can selectively separate between sodium and lithium. So once the first brine moves through and we shed all the harmful pollutants such as magnesium, which is the most, calcium, sulfates, then we can get rid of the sodium. And at the end of the day, our goal is to have a pure lithium chloride solution that we can then turn into lithium hydroxide.
So recently on LinkedIn, I had shared some research that's coming out of universities around the use of graphene to be able to actually get down to the nano and the subatomic level, specifically applied to desalination, because desalination as it relates to conversion of ocean water into drinkable water is a very expensive proposition. So this actually allows for that nanoparticle filtration. But one of the questions that came up in that forum that I have posted on LinkedIn is, as some of these different types of chemicals gets filtered out, where do they go and how do you ensure that they don't clog up the system or the membrane in this case?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good question. So as the brine is flowing in a cross flow manner past and through the membrane, you would think that it could get clogged, right? But the harmful ions like the magnesium and the calcium are too big to actually pass through the nanoparticles that have pores in them that allow the lithium to move through. But what happens, what you think would happen would maybe they would get stuck on the outside. So once in a while, we would run our system backwards and backwash to clean it out. And that avoids the clogging.
Okay, that's great. That's perfect. Excellent. I think some of the more advanced, commercialized, and on a large scale that's out there is probably examples in Israel as it pertains to desalination specifically. So I'm sure they got some great techniques, but not specific to lithium though. Now, one of the things you mentioned early on in the conversation is that Bolivia is a difficult place to work, and there are some issues with getting some mineral land rights, as an example. Now, Bolivia, of course, as most people know, they've endured decades of military coups and corruption. And because they're so natural resource rich, their governments have really in the past have easily signed away mineral rights for quick profits, but have really left the people socially very poor. And it's interesting to see how that region is still 90% based on tourism as their economic driver. How are you trying to get into Bolivia when you're working against some of these kind of structural issues? And of course, I think there are a couple of companies that the government is working with. One in particular is ACI Systems and KU Tech Salt Technologies. But how are you trying to get your foot in the door?
Yeah, that's a good question. So Bolivia is a very unique situation. I think it's really twofold. You know, ACI did get a really big contract to do their lithium processing down there. So congratulations to them. Prior to that, CAMC, which is a Chinese company, was contracted to do their potash processing, which is the step before lithium. So potash, which is potassium chloride, comes out of the evaporation pond sequence prior to lithium. So they're in the process of building out these systems. You know, I've been down to Bolivia 3 times now and met with the president of YLB, which is the Bolivian state-run lithium agency. And, you know, a lot of people are, one, scared to invest in Bolivia because they nationalized all their oil some time ago. They're not willing to give up any rights to profits. So these deals that they did with CAMC and ACI are just come in and contract and build out the system and then leave and turn it over to Bolivia, which is good. I mean, those companies are huge companies and they make a good profit from that. We're in a little bit different of a situation being a startup. A lot of our capital is going to this R&D. So just coming in and putting in a system isn't really our business model. But we're also still in the development phase. So once we have established a pilot system that works in other areas such as Chile or Argentina, we might revisit conversations with Bolivia and say, look, our system can work in any concentration of magnesium to lithium. Just test it out and see if this works for you. And then maybe we can come to some sort of a deal. I mean, you know, Bolivia it's super interesting. I mean, I hope that they succeed in the current methods that they're trying to undertake in order to extract the lithium. I haven't been down there since last May. Last November. So almost 9 months now. But, you know, we'll see. It's a lot tougher to do business with them than it is with Chile or Argentina. I'll tell you that.
Yeah. Well, thanks for painting the kind of the reality on the ground and the challenges of a private company that comes into that environment. Let's talk a little bit about some of the environmental impacts of mineral lithium mining. Because the output is really, there's this kind of growing output of magnesium waste, right? So as you separate the magnesium from the lithium, and then on top of that, that process oftentimes also used lime, which is a very economic method. So you also have residual lime waste. So right now, I don't think I'm not sure if active studies that's looking at the effects of groundwater, freshwater supply, that's supporting agricultures that are, you know, growing things like quinoa as an example. But how big is this problem? How big is it going to get? And do you have any thoughts around how they're going to be remedying it?
Yeah. So, I mean, bringing it back to the basics, there's 2 methods of lithium extraction. You know, there's hard rock extraction, which is much less environmentally friendly. I mean, any sort of hard rock extraction, whether you're talking about copper or lithium or whatever it may be, is digging a hole into the ground, into the earth, using a lot of heavy machinery to do so, and emitting a lot of CO2 emissions to do that, with a big environmental footprint, both physically and in the air. So the other side is brine, which they have these big evaporation ponds. The evaporation ponds are a huge footprint, first of all. The ones that SQM runs down in the Atacama Desert are 44 square kilometers. I mean, that's like absolutely massive. It's like the size of Manhattan, essentially. I, however, think that they're beautiful, but they also are not the natural land that makes up that salar, that desert. So the second thing is what the byproducts are of that. So as you mentioned, there's a lot of wasted magnesium, but magnesium by itself is actually very useful if it's isolated. The problem is these big waste piles are a mixture, right? So it's just like lithium. If you don't have 99.5 or 99.9% pure lithium, you can't really use it for the things that you need to use it for. It's the same with magnesium. So in these big excess piles of salts, it's magnesium, it's calcium, it's sodium, it's potassium. It's all the things that got precipitated out in the lead up to lithium. So moving away from the evaporation ponds and making this process more environmentally friendly, we minimize the footprint. So we're contained in a small facility that is, 1 square kilometer, maybe even 0.5 square kilometer. It's a really small facility. It's the size of a reverse osmosis water desalination plant, like the ones in Israel or the big one in San Diego. So it's a very small comparative footprint. Us compared to other direct extraction technologies, such as the ones that you mentioned earlier. So techniques such as ion exchange or sorption or solvent exchange, they first need a lot of fresh water, which these communities down in the Atacama Desert, it's a huge, huge deal that fresh water is being taken for lithium extraction where they need it for agriculture to sustain their communities. The second is a lot of these new technologies are using reagents. So in order to actually yield the lithium, they need to chemically treat it with different types of acids and different type of reagents. And then they need to clean their systems using more reagents and chemicals, which is harmful for the environment. We don't need any reagents. We don't need any fresh water. And those are two huge, huge benefits of our technology versus others.
Okay. So for those that are interested in EnergyX and they want to be able to, continue to follow your progress through R&D into commercialization, how can they follow your work and the progress?
Yeah, absolutely. So our website is just energyx.com. We're also at EnergyX on Instagram, at EnergyX on Twitter, Facebook.com/EnergyX. And then my personal Instagram is at Teague Egan and on Twitter at Teague Egan as well. So the full name of the company is Energy Exploration Technologies, but we pretty much secured EnergyX on all platforms. So if you look for us with that, you should probably be able to find us.
Sounds great. So today I've been joined by Teague Egan, founder and CEO of EnergyX. Teague, it's been a real pleasure.
Thanks, Scott.